Before we begin, a quick word from our friends at The Wanderer.
You start with your own breathing. Match the rhythm of the breeze that carves the canopy, the birds and bugs chirping in set intervals. Feel the subtle pulse rising up from the ground beneath you. To wander is to dance with the forest. But the forest isn't just the partner. She's the music, the style. She's the rhythm. She's the set of ancient steps and movements that have been passed down from one dancer to another. She teaches you to dance the dance she invented to the music she's singing in a tonal system she thought up one night as it pleased her. You breathe, and you listen, and you wait for your place, your first step, the call to... The Wanderer is a new fairy folktale podcast from T.H. Ponders, a member of the Fable and Folly Network. Listen to the show by searching for The Wanderer in Apple Podcasts or by visiting www.callofthewander.com.
And now, back to that thing that we do. From a speech delivered by Bureaucratic of Cartley, then mayor of Salem, at the conclave of All Hallows Eve, 1992. As you can clearly see from this chart, since I have become mayor 7 years ago, the quality of blood harvested within the 5 wards of Salem, the quality of hunts, and the palatability of dreams all have risen precipitously. As I promised you when I first stood for election, all the treasures of the earth and the riches of the Umbra have been laid out before you, just as a vanquished people offer up every coin and every crumb to their plunderers. For the first time since the founding, Walled Salem is running a surplus. You have seen the benefits for yourselves, and you all know the reason for them. The mortals who deceive themselves into thinking that they are the masters of this place have turned their ancestors' great crime into a wellspring of commerce and lucre. It is crass and it is shallow, but it is to our benefit. The steady flow of tourists allows us to gorge ourselves on the fate of the land. The Magi have robes to fleece. The fairies have fresh nightmares to savor. Mistake not, I, Bureaucratic, have done this. I have fulfilled my promises to you, every one. Tonight, you have only to make a slight change to our constitution, and I shall fulfill a new set of promises. For now, you are sated, but you are not free. You still dwell in the shadow of 300 years. The mortals but murmur, and you quiver and quake. Make me your mayor a second time, and I shall bring the foolish callow kine crashing down from the summit of the sky. Like a lion, I will hurl their frail hegemony down to the lowest depths. If it come to it, I shall leave none alive between the Merrimack and the sea, or in any realm beyond. I will turn the laughable empire into cinders and ash and restore you to your rightful place of power. All this I swear by the gift of Will Graxarglyph. Wote, Bureaucratic of Cartley.
In the decades and centuries since its great tragedy, the city of Salem, Massachusetts has become a sanctuary for the strange, the unusual, and yes, the supernatural. Werewolves, vampires, fairies, mages, and other more esoteric things now walk the streets in relative safety. And when the mortal population gets too curious, they do what any community would do. They form a committee. Welcome to The Chimera, a role-playing adventure podcast. Our campaign this season is called Gallows Hill, and it takes place in our version of the World of Darkness, the setting that encompasses Vampire the Masquerade and all its sibling products. I'm Vin Labate, and I play 8-Ball, a vampire with mental health issues and an assortment of fake IDs, and joining me this season are...
I'm Braden Lamb, and I play Mew, a mummy cat who's into urban planning and sacred geometry.
I'm Jeffrey Bard, and I play Jack Foxglove, a werewolf shaman who coaches the Salem High School football team, the Salem High Witches.
I'm Ethan Bremner, and I play Mother McCree, an immortal Irish witch and American Civil War veteran.
I'm Kacey Smith, and I play Truly Reynard, an animalistic fairy running from her past, sometimes literally.
And I'm Kelly Weissman Asbruce Jackson, the storyteller.
Now, let's get started.
All right, so we return to the goings-on in Gallows Hill. As established at the end of the last game, we are jumping forward 2 months, and things have changed surprisingly little, problematically little. In fact, since you expected this appointment to only last a few days, it's continued. So I want to start with just sort of a visual tour of the offices in the space at Tuck Alley. So when we left, you had this space that was established, this old shop used to belong to the Clove Merchant in Tuck Alley that was going to be used by the sanitary committee. It's been 2 months. Walk me through what they look like. We'll just sort of pan the camera around the space. What's going on in the space at Tuck Alley?
Probably right in the front door. There's a counter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's the counter. The counter has what looks to be like a really old, crappy, like late 90s PC on it. Like yellow desktop case, yellowed CRT monitor. But 8-Ball has put a fully functional, high-end, modern system inside it. Still kind of unpleasant to look at the screen, but yep. There's a sticker on the side of the monitor that is Roadhog from Overwatch, and there is a fancy office chair behind it.
So this is an open concept space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not a lot of stuff going on. So there is a kind of behind the counter and kind of towards the back near where there was like a kitchen, right? Somewhere, kitchenette?
I mean, there could be, but there wasn't before. It was really very sparse before.
Okay.
Basically just the counter and then the trapdoor down in the basement. That's really the only things that were in the space before. But you've got plenty of time to change it around if you want to.
Yeah, I think there should be a kitchenette. And sort of next to that small little space, there's like a shabby couch. Looks like it was picked up like off of somebody's front porch who had left it for somebody to grab. Is sitting there, and there is a pretty decent flat screen that's kind of set in front of it on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's like a rug underneath it too.
Truly has a desk set up. So I know that there were a bunch of windows, I think that we had mentioned in this space. So she has the desk by the last window. So it's set up so that it's facing the rest of the windows and the door, and her back's more towards the wall. And there's not really much on the desk. There is, like if she's there, her laptop might be there, but otherwise it's pretty empty, except there's usually a basket of oddly shaped and colored fruit that changes in the types of fruit that are there as it gets eaten and replenished.
Mm-hmm.
There is also somewhere a large, like slightly, probably a little bit more than 6 foot tall, kind of ornate looking mirror up against one of the walls, somewhere that it's, easy to access, but not too much in the way.
Speaking of windows, there are heavy blinds and curtains that have been installed.
Does Tuck Alley have like day and night? Is it?
Yeah, I was just about to ask that.
It exists in the Umbra and exists specifically in like a Fey aspect element of the Umbra. So I'm going to say it does not have a conventional day-night cycle, but by and large, excepting very specific circumstances, there's nothing that is actually dangerous sunlight from a vampire perspective in the Umbra. There are things that are like day, but generally they don't come with conventional sunlight. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule. There may be specific areas of the Umbra that would be harmful to a vampire in that sense, but by and large, it can look like the day in the Umbra, and it's not a problem for a vampire.
No amount of explaining that
I'm
is
sure.
going to make 8-Ball comfortable.
I'm not arguing against the curtains at all. I think it makes perfect sense. I'm just saying from a practical perspective, that's the reality.
There may be a long-standing bicker between Truly and 8-Ball because every time Truly's there, she pushes the curtains back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm assuming 8-Ball replaces them. And there's been a perpetual circular argument of this isn't sunlight. This is very silly. I don't care. It looks like sunlight.
In the corner of the room, like set aside, just there on the floor, there is a rucksack and a go bag. They're both, the rucksack is relatively large. The go bag is relatively small. That's it.
I put this on the Slack, but I'm going to note it here too, that as the rucksack sits there, Truly has been gradually adding like non-perishable food items into it. So first it was like some beef jerky and then like some mac and cheese. Like she just like per week, every time the rucksack's still there, she just kind of adds one more thing that's not hardtack into it.
Like those little foil pouches of tuna.
Yep. There's definitely a can of tuna in there.
Yep,
or something.
those are great for hiking. For
power
backpacking.
Bars, trail mix.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Braden, has Mew done anything in the Tuck Alley space, or is Mew focused on the mayor's office?
Oh, he's definitely got a pretty clear setup at the back center of the office space. There's a nice glass top office desk with just little brass legs, let's say, and on it are two little granite obelisks on either side, and a little cushion on top of it, and one more little cushion in front of it on the floor where Amal regularly sits with his laptop. And behind the desk on the wall is a large framed vintage concert poster for Sun Ra. Let's say from the early 80s.
All right. So as we open on, roughly, I guess the beginning of month 3, right? Because it's been 2 months. So beginning of month 3 of the temporary appointment as collective acting mayor of Salem and its environs. This is the state of things in the office at Tuck Alley. People are at their desks. They're busy with paperwork and various other relatively mundane responsibilities. Most of the mayoral duties are fairly time-consuming and banal, you've learned over the last couple of months. Not that there's not interesting things to be done, but there's a lot of bureaucratic Meshugas that has to be dealt with in the course of covering the responsibilities of the mayor. Do we want to say anything about how this work has been distributed amongst the group?
I think 8-Ball will pretty readily take over the sort of bureaucratic front end, like sorting incoming information, and also like updating her files to keep a catalog of like who's doing what in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll probably just shove files at people on occasion.
Do you think you would spend some of your XP on like a skill specialty in Meshugas?
Oh, maybe. I need the right source book.
I think Ethan has established that Mother McCree will be doing the absolute minimum required of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So she most importantly, she has not been around for the last 2 months. She's been there, but she's been like vast amounts of time. She is not in the office. And when she is there, she really, really, really tries not to do any mayoral work. But if push comes to shove and she has to do it, she'll often agree to do the most like vile and dirtiest jobs that need to be done. But mostly the ones, as long as they're not paperwork, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Mew was most specifically interested in any matters of zoning or property rights, just sort of the general layout of the city, however much that may overlap with non-veiled Salem.
You're going to get rid of the stoners outside the cemetery, aren't you?
Well,
you're going to use your mayoral power to get rid of the stoners outside the cemetery.
I will interfere with that.
Oh, man.
Remember, we're only mayor of veiled Salem. The rest of Salem.
It's true.
And the very human stoners are not actually under our auspices.
Well, sure, but if Mew can redirect traffic of, hungry spirits down down Walnut Street, dividing the pot shop from the graveyard, then so be it.
And what about Jack and Truly?
Jack is not a guy you really want doing paperwork. Like he will certainly do paperwork if it's necessary, but he's not it's not his strength. He can function as a gopher, and he would be willing to do that if stuff needs to be delivered, or we need to bring somebody in to talk to them, or he needs to go knock on doors. Like, that's a thing that he can do, and probably would be better at. So again, I don't know exactly what's involved in doing mayor stuff, but like, you could imagine that like 8-Ball hands him a file where he needs to do some stuff with it, and maybe 1 or 2 pieces end up in the correct place, but then 5 or 6 more end up in the wrong place.
I think 8-Ball frequently sends Jack off when like someone needs to be talked to, and like she's not interested in hearing the other side of it.
What do you think about Truly?
I think Truly would, she's probably pretty good at like any new arrivals, like doing the kind of the welcome to Salem spiel, and here's how our society works, and here's some good places to eat, and here's some pretty good, housing for whatever your particular paranormal complications happen to be. And I think she's pretty good at, as much as the mayor is collecting their, their information as far as the problems that are then getting filtered over to like the sanitation committee or to the mayor. She's probably a pretty good person to like talk to people, collect that information, calm them down, make them feel like, yeah, we're gonna get on that, and we care about looking after your concerns.
Very good. So it's obviously a strange time in the city of Salem, and there are definitely clear and present causes for concern, because the mayor took the relatively unusual, certainly not unprecedented step of having to leave Salem for a few days, along with a number of other leading citizens. 2 of the current associate justices of the abnormal courts, and one of the wardens, in fact. So that's pretty significant group of people that left Salem and did not come back, and have not been heard from, and have not been found in these 2 months that have gone past. So your very temporary appointment is stretched on into an indefinite one. There's no replacing the mayor officially until the next cycle of elections, which still isn't due until this Halloween. So you're still like 7 months away from that. At the same time, things proceed sort of as they always have to. As I said, there's a lot of mundane work to be going on. Although, there was a pretty high profile jailbreak from the prison at All Hallows Hall, and Ishmael got away. He hasn't been heard of since then. You were making an effort to try and track down his friend, Betty Fishin, but the address you had for her either was never correct or is now out of date, right? So that lead went cold. There's just a normal suburban family living in that place now. Other things that are happening, the lives of the residents of Salem continue. At the suggestion, I think it was from 8-Ball, way back in episode 2 or 3, I think 3, Henri Danticat has opened a sort of hotel for the strange. that's actually proving to be very, very helpful and popular. So, the Sanitation Commission has made at least one significant contribution to the city in that sense. The residents of the city meet to have public meetings 3 times per year. Once on Candlemas, that's when you all were appointed. Once on Beltane, and once on All Hallows Eve. And the next meeting coming up is on Beltane. You'll notice that those are not equidistant, right? There's 3 months between the first 2 and then 6 months between the second 2. So your next meeting is coming up in about a month. Assuming that the mayor doesn't show up before then, it's going to be your responsibility to guide that meeting. Each of the meetings in the year has a overall purpose to it. And this meeting, this cycle, it's time to renew the city's diplomatic relationships with the other various regional administrations and power forces that surround Salem, like the people who are in charge in Boston, the folks who are in charge in Worcester, like all those different regional groupings. Salem has some degree of relationships with everybody who borders it, and then a few other close by power groups. And so it's time to renew those relationships. That's what's called for at the upcoming meeting on Beltane. So one of the things that has to happen is that somebody, maybe the whole group, maybe one person, maybe a subset of the group, has to meet with diplomatic representatives from each of the groups that Salem has relationships with. In addition to that, there needs to be a meeting of the Council of Wardens, which is the different members of the citizenry who are responsible for the various loci, the places of spiritual power where the line between the regular world and the Umbra is very thin. All the people who are in charge of the loci in and around Salem, there's a council of them. That meeting has to take place. There's also a meeting of the legates. The legates are the people who are responsible for the various outlying areas around Salem. There's basically an area that's to the south of Salem proper, that's like Lynn and its environment. That's the south. And then there are 3 other groupings in addition to Salem in the center. Each one of them has a person who's ostensibly in charge of that. That council gets together once per each window between public meetings. So that has to happen. So those are 3 things that sort of have to happen at some point, and you're responsible for figuring out when and how those things will take place. And then there's whatever else you want to do. We talked a little bit in between now in the last session about what each of the characters has been working on sort of in the background during these months of relative downtime. A lot of research going on, especially trying to figure out as much as you can about Mr. Chamberlain and Bureaucratic of Cartley, as well as the chimeric script. I know that was another area of study people were interested in. Does anybody want to talk about the things that their individual characters learned or did or have shared with the group?
So we probably have a pretty long chat about what 8-Ball has pulled up on Bureaucratic of Cartley, because it's kind of a big deal. Bureaucratic is a real classical, like Eastern European, Central Asian, like steppe warlord vampire from way back, like BC.
Yep. Thought to be maybe the 3rd oldest vampire in North America. That's the guesstimate.
Yeah. Like he's got connections with, say, Dracula.
The Dracula.
Yeah.
The Dracula.
He has a couple other children here in town besides Espinosa. And one of the things that really jumps out to 8-Ball.
Oh, just to clarify, Espinosa is not Bureaucratic's child.
Oh.
I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't make that clear. But yeah, he's not. He's a sire of a couple of people from the Mayapple Lodge, but not Espinosa.
Okay, I was wrong on that one. Okay. And there's a couple other children here in town. And like 8-Ball will take a minute to explain that, like, if her sire were to show up, she would immediately get like pretty dumb about it. And like, you know, not completely servile, but like you'd see some personality changes and like some unusual willingness to do what someone else says. And her sire was embraced in the 20s. Like, the more powerful a vampire is, the more powerful the sway they can hold over their children is. So we really need to be aware that like certain people just like, if Macarius wants to work through certain people, he's going to be able to do that. Also, he's got a lot of real uncomfortable abilities, you know, some flesh shaping, some blood sorcery. I think Jack also maybe had pulled up some stuff.
Yeah, Jack did. Hang on. I gotta go settle my daughter down. I'll be right back. It'll be like 2-3 minutes. Sorry.
Sure. Maybe it's a good opportunity to check in with Mother McCree.
So you guys have established the past. I'm working on the present. As I said, Mother McCree has been bouncing back and forth out of the office. And you guys just assume probably that she's doing what she does, which is to kind of patrol and check out the rest of the world, sort of. For the first few weeks after Espinosa was supposed to be back, she was still kind of cursing his name and calling him, you know, lazy and just whatever. After a while, she stopped doing that pointedly. And it's been 2 months. So I would say like a month in, she decides that she's gleaned enough information to share with you that there's been no sight of Espinosa or the party anywhere that she can find, though her ability to look into those locations is being somewhat limited by the fact that Bacurius has expanded the realm of his influence well into Worcester and Western Providence, and has pushed out at least the native werewolves from that area, and is militarizing them or setting up magical military defenses in the areas that he now controls, or his court now controls.
Yikes.
So this expands beyond Hartford up to Worcester, and
south of Worcester proper, but south
of Worcester proper, right, west of Providence, where the werewolves used to be. But he's created a sort of I'll just use Kelly's word here, a quadrangle between Hartford, Springfield, Sturbridge, and the Mohegan Sun area. And his main location of kind of defense is also where he probably is, which is I think I'm trying to remember where you said exactly. Enfield, right?
Dead Mall in Enfield, Connecticut.
Yeah, the dead. Okay, Enfield is loaded because it's also one of the Quabbin towns. That's my confusion on that.
Yes, right.
Sorry,
the other Enfield.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So his seat is in the Dead Mall in Enfield, Connecticut, but he is expanding his influence.
Good highway access.
He's expanding his influence, and as far as I can tell, there's no sign of the party that sought him out.
Yeah.
And Mother McCree is not often shaken, but she is not shaken, but she is pretty adamant that she's not going to push too far into these areas.
Yeah, I'd say that's alarming.
Yeah.
I'd qualify that as alarming.
After a couple weeks, I think Truly would have tried to use Chamberlain's blood to just write a message to him and see if, like, you know, is there any information he can share? Was there any response to that at all?
So when you first had the letter exchange with Mr. Chamberlain, that was just like less than a day after Espinosa had left. Right? And so the next time you try that trick with the blood, it's like a week or two later, right?
Correct.
There's no answer. And there has not been any answer since with any subsequent attempt.
Okay.
Do you let us know you're doing that?
I mean, she'll say, what do you guys think about writing to Mr. Chamberlain? And then if everyone's like, sure, she'll let everyone know what happened when she did. Or if everyone's like, no, then she won't. But she's definitely going to do it.
Mother McCree will definitely disapprove.
As will Mew.
Like, pretty strongly.
Yeah, that week she gets 2 cans of tuna added to her rucksack.
She's not using that rucksack, by the way. It's just
right. No,
there.
that's the thing. She knows that like one day it's going to get used and open.
It's going to be so good when it happens.
Up and it's 20 pounds heavier.
Right. And Truly will be mildly amused for 3 minutes, and that's about enough for her.
Yeah, 8-Ball has very bad feelings about what probably became of that expedition. So she does approve of checking in with Chamberlain, because honestly, Mercurius is a large enough monster that like...
we need some bigger monsters on our side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff, you want to share about what Jack learned about Mercurius and Mr. Chamberlain?
Yeah. So during the 2 months, like every once in a while, he'll come into the office and he'll be missing an eye, or, you know, his hand will be missing a couple of digits, or his face will be really badly burned. But over a couple of days, it ends up going away and he ends up looking like normal Jack. And a week after that, he'll come back with some new wound or some new, like something has definitely happened to him. But he learns that Mercurius has some very, very powerful allies beyond just the vampires that are living in Salem. One of them is Orphan Maker, the doom that came to Namkeg.
Namkeg is the indigenous name for Salem, FYI.
An extremely, extremely powerful spirit, one that Jack would not feel comfortable hunting at all. Then there was an interesting relationship between the spirits and Mercurius, where he kind of actively catered or campaigned for like integrating ghosts better into society. But by the time I'm trying to figure out how Jack would be able to describe this, the spirits didn't like him after he came into office, that he didn't treat them any better than others had treated them, and that they feared him rather than respected him. That some spirits ended up going with him during his exile, and that those spirits were probably some of the more dangerous ones. Let's see, what else was there?
I'll just add a couple of points of clarification to make sure that the group understands. So the premise of Veiled Salem, right, is that we've got all these different supernatural creatures and people, but everybody is ostensibly equal, right? Every citizen gets one vote, and theoretically, there's no hierarchy, right? There's a very natural hierarchy in the spiritual world of power, and that power, one of the things about it is that the spirits eat each other on a regular basis, right? Not all spirits eat other spirits, but most of them do at some point in their existence. And Mercurius sort of preached, okay, we're gonna integrate the spiritual world into Veiled Salem, right? I'm gonna propose the idea of extending citizenship, but he didn't do anything to try and eradicate that hierarchy. So basically, it was just a way of further enforcing it. It didn't end up getting passed during the time where he was mayor, but it definitely would have passed if he'd gotten a second term. So from the perspective of like Joe Ghost, right, it was worse than the kind of hands-off attitude that the Salem administration takes towards the spirit world, because it was actively supporting the most carnivorous, cannibalistic element in the spirit grouping. So a lot of those really powerful spirit-eating ghosts that were friends with Mercurius left with him when he was exiled.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually one of the reasons why Salem is a good place for ghosts to hang out, because a lot of the worst predators aren't around anymore.
What else was there? There was, it looks like there's an Aratha who allied with him, or at least until Mercurius left or was exiled, and that's Flycatcher.
Flycatcher is a citizen. He's still on the rolls.
He may be somebody that we can talk to and get more information from. And then Jack was also very interested in getting more information about Mr. Chamberlain, because I think Jack pretty clearly expresses that he feels like we're getting played by too many sides. Like there's just too many sides in this, and he doesn't quite know which direction we need to be pointed and which things to actually be afraid of and which things to actively confront. So he'd been looking into Mr. Chamberlain too, and didn't really find too much that was useful, other than he seems to be a better person than the stories let on, or that that he understood, at least from the spirit's perspective, that Chamberlain seemed to genuinely treat spirits well, and that's relatively unusual. It seems that he had an active interest in spirits, and again treated them well, but that Chamberlain is not coming back until the city is swallowed by the sea, which is kind of a terrifying, if we think he may be coming back or is trying to re-wield influence here, Salem may be in greater danger than we thought. But if we want to learn more about Mr. Chamberlain, going to the Spirit of the Stranded Stone might be something we want to do.
Yeah, all this news of both Mr. Chamberlain's and Bureaucratic's interest in the spirit world in general and ghosts in particular, I feel like has got to be news to Mew. Like,
yes,
Mew is very official in his duties as warden of Harmony Grove, but he hasn't gotten into the lives of the ghosts. A lot of them kind of come and go. He comes and goes. So yeah, I think he's starting to realize maybe it wasn't his idea in the first place to advocate for their citizenship. Maybe somebody put a bug in his ear about that.
You got incepted.
At no point is Mother McCree going to hear anything positive about Chamberlain without shaking her head.
Yeah, and those stories don't come from Jack as one big monologue. It's more just like he comes back, he's broken, he kind of shares some stuff with the team. He goes out, disappears for a little while again, comes back, is broken in some way again, shares a little bit more, and that's kind of how it goes.
Jeff, while you were out, we should probably go over very quickly and possibly in a way that I will cut out entirely the stuff that McCree learned, which is essentially that Bureaucratic has been actively expanding and militarizing his range, essentially up to the borders of Worcester and Providence.
Which, because you're from California, you should know means that the bulk of the state of Connecticut, or at least east of Hartford, right?
Yeah.
And up through the main body of Massachusetts.
Yeah, he controls probably half-ish of Connecticut and maybe an eighth of southern central Massachusetts, which isn't an enormous area, but it's significant because it encompasses two whole areas that used to be controlled by other groups.
Oh, and those other groups are werewolves.
Werewolves, and he also conquered Springfield, which was controlled by vampires. So he took a bite out of the werewolf, werecat, werereptile, wereshark control groups that abut Salem are the group to the extreme north up the coast called Guamac's Band, and a group in the interior to the north and west called the Black Bear Brotherhood, and then down along the southern coast of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and part of Long Island, there's another third group called the Loyal Confraternity of Isles and Shores. And he took a chunk of Black Bear Brotherhood turf is what he conquered when he took over the area around Mohegan Sun Casino and Sturbridge Village. Then I think it's pretty transparent to 8-Ball, at least, why it's useful to control a casino as a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to walk you through that, or do you feel like you have a handle on it by yourself?
I mean, there's a lot of rotating traffic. People come in, they don't stay long, so word doesn't tend to get around. There's a lot of ways that you can exploit it for basic
human resources and blood resources. Yeah. It's juicy.
It's a 24-hour sunless environment where people who don't know each other and don't pay attention to each other come and go constantly. So it's basically a blood factory if you control it.
Yeah, and Mohegan Sun is like a maze. It's got all sorts of nooks and crannies. And it's also like almost an arcology. It's got several large hotels. You could do a lot of stuff in Mohegan Sun.
Yeah, and that had been basically, like, no one was exploiting it because it was werewolf territory. And they were just keeping the vampires out. And now they're not keeping the vampires out anymore.
And with that, we'd like to introduce our first sponsor for this podcast.
I was just thinking that. What were the actually, Kelly? So were the werewolves attached to the Mohegan Sun? Were they like descended from the native populations?
Probably some of them were.
Yeah.
So if we want to go back into like the dimness of prehistory here, there are virtually no vampires in the Americas pre-Columbian contact. There's like, it's literally a list of a handful of exceptions, but by and large, there weren't vampires in the New World pre-Columbian contact, but there were plenty of Aratha. There were plenty of shape changers. So in the Western Hemisphere, almost all vampires are descended from transplants to the New World, whereas it's a real mix in terms of the Aratha. Plenty of people are descended from transplants because plenty of folks came over on the boats like generic Europeans did, and people from Africa, obviously. But there's more of a mix. So I'm sure probably the pack that was in charge, whose main job, as they saw it, was in charge of like just keeping the vampires out of the casino because it would be dangerous. Vampires took this over. They were probably had members who were of native ancestry. But the way that these large werefolk groupings work is they're much more diffuse than like a vampire principality. It's very vertical. There's a prince. The prince is in charge. He probably has a bunch of enforcers. It's very, very vertically aligned. The werefolk control zones are more like, well, there's like a group of werefolk who are over in this part of the state, and they have their sense of what they're responsible for, and there's a group that's over here, and they sort of have their sense of territory, but they all have some kind of affiliation with each other. They all come together for meetings on a monthly or quarterly basis, and some kind of like shared culture. So it's easier to pick off a chunk of that than it would be to pick off a chunk of a city in the same way.
So that's fun.
Yeah.
Mercurius is a terrifying dude. Like I think that's what it comes down to. Like he is not somebody that any of us, as a group or anything could even dream of like taking down. Like even his generals are not something we could dream of doing that. Like he is a scary, scary person if he wants to come at Salem. And he also took out like 4 of our most powerful people. So,
well, we don't know, but
certainly
they're certainly missing.
Yeah, what they were trying to do didn't happen.
Yeah,
because nobody's back.
Like, I don't even know if we have anything to negotiate with, right? Like, that's not even something that we could, I don't even know.
Yeah, when 8-Ball gets that news from McCree, she will probably move up the meetings with the heads of neighboring governments on the schedule and probably pop off an email to the leadership in New York, because that's probably that's the other front on Mercurius's territory.
Now, this diplomatic portion of the mayoral duties for this meeting, would that have involved, because obviously prior to this, he was still the leader of Hartford, would that have involved correspondence with him, or is that too far out?
Salem has official diplomatic relationships with the following official existing diplomatic relationships. So who you're expecting, right? It has a relationship with the 2 Aratha control zones that directly border it, Guamuk's Band and the Black Bear Brotherhood. It also has a relationship with the Loyal Confraternity of Isles and Shores, even though they don't exactly border, but they're nearby. They're down to the south. They control the Cape and Islands, southern coast of Rhode Island, and part of the southern coast of Connecticut, and about half of Long Island. So those are 3 relationships that they have existing diplomatic connections with. In addition, they have relationships with the Palatinate of Worms, who are the Fae who are in charge of Worcester, the Guardianship of the Quabbin Horror, who are the Magi who are in charge of
the Quabbin Valley,
Central Massachusetts and the Five College area, Quabbin Valley. The Crimson Robe Concilium, who are the Magi in charge of Boston, Greater Boston, and they don't have existing diplomatic ties with, but like the nearest sort of next group that would make sense to have a connection with would be the Ochre Mask Concilium, which control Providence. Oh, and they do have a tie with the Principality of Springfield, but the Principality of Springfield no longer exists.
So that's the only one that we had a diplomatic relationship with that was essentially deposed by Macarius's court. Okay.
And a chunk of Black Bear Brotherhood turf that he took, but the Black Bear Brotherhood still exists, right? He didn't take them over whole hog.
They're in chunks. They're in pieces over the
It's just much more diffuse. It's like, it is the difference between a urban society and a nomadic society, right? It's just much more diffuse.
And a takeover of a vampire-controlled area by another vampire, is that most likely to be for lack of a better term, genocide, or a diplomatic kind of influence takeover?
I think that can sort of go either way, depending on the nature of the two groups. Using more traditional vampire terms, if we're talking something like a Camarilla city and a Sabbat city, one of those is going to get slaughtered. But if it's two Camarilla cities, they'll probably merge.
Do I have any sense of that, given what I've seen?
Let's see. So Mother McCree is semi-uniquely positioned to be able to go in and root around places. Like, she can get almost anywhere that she wants to, given her powers. But she's also not very sociable, right? So getting on the ground human intelligence, like interviewing people, probably isn't exactly her bag. Do you have anything you'd want to say about her strategy for figuring out the question of, like, how did he come to power in Springfield, say?
So Springfield is a place where she would not be particularly comfortable, because it is a very urban environment. But I think what she would do... she's going to have a relatively good sense of the behavior of vampires. I guess what she would do is she would maintain vigilance over places that she would assume would be frequented by vampires, and kind of try to get a sense of, these are people who... I think she has intuition that is supernatural. So I'm going to say that she's looking for the idea of people who, are new here, or have been here for a really long time and know, act like they own the place, versus people who act like they're new to the place. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for her to find someone she identifies as vampire, or a group of people she identifies as vampires, and watch their behavior to discern whether they act like they are new there or whether they belong there.
I think with some careful observation, she can determine it doesn't look like her powers should allow her to have some determination of, like, this vampire is a newish vampire, this vampire is an older vampire, right? That should be something she should be able to determine with the life sphere. Mm-hmm. So I would say her overall impression is there are a lot of new vampires walking around. And by new, I mean like new in the last few years, right? Okay. Somebody went on a recruitment spree.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. In Springfield, there's a mix. It's not all new people. If there was a big war here, it seems like there are a lot of older folks for that, right? Mm-hmm. You'd expect a greater depopulation.
Sure.
If there was a big, high-profile conflict.
Okay.
So Mew is definitely going to... I don't know if you have any plans for this. I just thought I'd ask. Mew is going to start asking around the region to contact other mummy cults and mummies. I don't know if you have any specific plans for that, but that's where he'd be starting to look. Now they are not likely to give him the time of day because he does not belong to any guild. But I've got to figure there's some kind of mummy presence in Mount Auburn Cemetery where they have a 25-foot long granite sphinx up on a hill. Maybe not granite, some kind of stone. It's big.
Wow. I guess I had not seen that. That's pretty cool. Yeah, if you look at the map, which theoretically could probably like make available somewhere for listeners to look at if they wanted to.
Yeah, I was thinking I might tweet that as a resource.
Definitely. I put an irresponsible amount of time into it. Why not let other people see it? There's no area in the area I covered in North America that is truly controlled by a mummy cult in isolation.
Sure.
But there are several places where there are substantial, there's like one or two powerful mummies in this vicinity, and they have a cult that's of significance. They tend to do best in areas that are controlled by magi or sometimes controlled by vampires. And there's definitely a substantial mummy cult in Boston. We will be getting into that, I hope, this episode.
Okay.
So Mew can definitely send a message to the substantial mummy cult in Boston.
And canonically, I think Washington, D.C. is lousy with mummies and cults.
Yeah. I think on the Eastern Seaboard, you're looking at Boston, New York, and D.C. as the major centers of mummy activity. And all of those are controlled by magi. And so that sort of fits in with that. A mummy is not a mage, but has significant overlaps both in capability and outlook with a mage. So, okay. So I outlined 3 areas, 3 things you have to do something to address between now and the next meeting of the conclave, the next public meeting of the Veiled Salem's citizens. The Council of Wardens has to meet, the Council of Legates has to meet, and these meetings with diplomatic emissaries from the various existing relationships and any other, if you want to try and have meetings with other groups further afield, that's also within the mayoral purview. And then there may be other things you want to follow up on, right? Like I think, Jeff, you mentioned that Jack has a lead that it might be worth talking to the spirit of the Stranded Stone as a possible lead on Mr. Chamberlain.
Yeah, I feel like...
So...
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you said you did send off a message to the leadership of New York?
I would say, yeah, probably. I don't know if that has happened or is about to happen, but that's something that's going to jump to the top of the priority list when the sort of big picture starts to come together.
Yeah, the three nearest sort of regional powers that Salem doesn't have an existing relationship with would be Providence, New Haven, and New York.
Yeah.
And Hartford.
And Hartford, yes. Right.
and the giant...
Right, and Hartford, I guess that's a good...
threat that now exists coming out of...
Yeah, I'll probably contact all of those, actually, given the geography.
Yeah.
And these are all principalities?
All 3 of those are concilia, which means they're meetings of mages.
Okay.
Magi tend to be the most likely places for magi to cluster in such numbers and such power that they could be in charge of an area, right? I mean, there's probably magi living in amongst the vampires in most places where vampires are in charge. But basically in a city, the default assumption is vampires are probably in charge here because vampires do very well in cities. Mm-hmm. They can grow their numbers the fastest of any of the major types of monsters it's not even comparable, right? And they're very good at maintaining control over human populations for a whole bunch of different reasons. Mm-hmm. So for it, you have an urban area where the vampires are not in control. You need some kind of specific reason why some other group is doing so much better in this area. And the reason why magi might be doing so much better than the baseline that vampires can do in an area is there's a major research university there because magi tend to cluster around learning institutions. Mm-hmm. They hide very well among mortal academics. So basically, Harvard, Brown, Yale, and Columbia all have magi councils attached to them that are so powerful they've taken over large areas of land.
Yeah, in that case, I'll probably contact both that set of magi and the local vampire leadership, because those areas all will probably still have some kind of prince or equivalent.
Yeah, it'll depend upon, like, each region's going to be different. Some places there'll be a prince, but they're officially subservient to the local mage council. Some places they're like not allowed to call themselves prince, but there's some kind of like essentially like vampire who's in charge of speaking for the vampiric population, right? There'll be somebody in the mechanisms of however they do local governance. Except in the very most extreme cases where, like, this particular municipality is so controlling, they've said vampires aren't allowed in, which is a very difficult line to put up, but there probably are places that are like that.
Mew is gonna reach out to local mummy cults in the region. Does he know the names of any of the Arisen or their cults?
He knows the guy in Boston real well.
Okay.
I mean, at least pretty well. If we want to go down that line of thinking, as I said, the mayor or the acting mayoral group in some capacity, right? Again, if you want to take these meetings individually, you want to take them as a whole group, you want to take them as a subgroup, however you want to do it, needs to have a meeting with reps from the existing diplomatic relationships. And the person that the Crimson Robe Concilium has sent to meet on their behalf with the leadership in Salem is Padamut.
That's it this week for the Chimera. Our theme music this season is Down Among the Dead Men, performed by Adrienne Howard, Emily Peterson, and Dirk I. Tiede. For information on other music used in this episode, check the show notes. You can support the Chimera by going to patreon.com/chimerapod. Patrons at any amount get access to behind-the-scenes setting and system info, art polls, and exclusive side games and one-shots. You can also find us online at thechimera.space or on Twitter and Facebook at ChimeraPod. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, so until then, thanks for listening.